So good to see you brave souls who come out here during the tropical hurricane warning right now. It was only something other than that, but on the way over here they called it a warning. Bad weather's coming in, and I told Denise, I said, we probably have more people that will be watching via the live stream this time, and we're thankful for that. I did have some people, just to mention again today, that they've been viewing it on live stream, and I'm glad that they're able to do it. All right, we're starting to, there it is. They were able to fix it. It is not the blind leading the blind here. That's great. All right, thank you, gentlemen, for that. We're dealing with biblical mythconceptions here, and I better put my glasses on so that I can see. This monitor allows me to see the screens behind me without turning around to see it, and helps keep me on track as well. And it's I just want to thank y'all for being patient with me from the last week's study. We dumped a lot of data, a lot of information on the wise men or the magi, and I appreciate the remarks some of you made, because I wasn't for sure if I was doing an overload, but there was just so much. And that's the way it is when you deal with an event that is recorded in the Scriptures. There's a lot more around it if you will do but a little bit of studying that will help you to do it. Now, we're talking about mythconceptions here, and this is one myth I want to start off with. I did not have this in my presentation a few days ago. I decided to add this. Myth: God doesn't answer prayers. That's been busted. Last Wednesday night, I talked to you about having surgery to remove some cancer within my neck. And we were concerned about it because it was considered a very aggressive cancer. And I said we were waiting to hear back the results. The surgeon had told us it'd be 7 to 10 days before we heard, which meant that we should have learned by yesterday what those results were. Some of you went home Wednesday night and began praying for me. And then you got up in the morning. I know one sister told me she got up in the morning and started praying for me again. By mid-morning that day, I got a notification on my cell phone that said, your results from the hospital are now available to you. I went to my patient portal, and after looking at all that jargon, trying to find the right thing, I found the Merkel cell carcinoma. It said margins negative, which meant there were no cancer around there, and lymph node, which was the important thing to me. If it had drained to other parts of my system, it said negative. So all of a sudden I thought, prayers are answered. And I do deeply want to thank you for your prayers for me on the behalf. I've received cards from you, and I do appreciate that. I'm doing fine right now. Saw the surgeon yesterday, and he was very pleased with the surgery and all the tissue that he took. He feels good that maybe I'm done, but I have an appointment with an oncologist on Monday, and my surgeon said, he's the one that will tell you what you need to do or don't do. So my wife is going with me to that because she doesn't trust me to say the right thing to him. I don't know, guys, if you have that same trouble. I told Denise, I said I ran a $70 million company, but I can't take care of asking the right questions to my doctor, right? But I appreciate her support, because not only was she there at the surgeon yesterday, but my daughter, who's in the medical field, was there. So I come into this little room with an entourage and for it. But I appreciate that my family was concerned, both my physical family and my spiritual family. So thank you so much. So enough on that. I do appreciate that. But we busted that myth wide open. We want to start again with some questions as we get into this. We'll cover a few more topics than we did last week. And this deals with, again, misconceptions. But I just want to ask the questions, and then we're going to go. We're not going to hit on all of these tonight, but I at least want to get them asked and get answers from you and go on. But to punish Cain for killing Abel, what was placed upon him? A mark, right? A mark, thank you. Problem with big auditorium is it's not really conducive in this space for class discussion, and I regret that, but it can't be helped. So I appreciate it. If you have something, shout out. There was a mark put on him to punish him, and that's what we hear in the world, right? And that was a mark that was upon him. I don't know why that dropped there at the bottom. It's not right yet. But money is the root of all. Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Y'all are already smart enough to know what that is. So we're going backwards here. Spare the rod and spoil the child. Yeah, I mean, that's what Mama, as she would bring out that switch from all of us 5 kids, right? You understand. From all those, from when the 5 kids of us would misbehave, Mama would pull out that switch and she'd say, spare the rod, spoil the child. We knew we were not going to be spoiled, okay, from that standpoint. God moves in, right, mysterious ways. That's just a great statement. And I know I've used it a lot. I'm sure you probably have. And how many of each kind of animals went into Noah's ark? 2. And some of you are smart enough to know where I'm going here, because we're going to talk about this one for sure tonight, and we're going to talk about Cain and Abel, and we'll see if we get to the rest. But who rules over hell? Who? Satan? Satan rules over hell. Yeah, the devil, right? The devil rules over hell. That's what we say. We're going to talk about that, but we probably won't get that tonight. I already see Jared back there smiling. And in Revelation, one who opposes or denies Christ is called and that's the hint right there. It's not a, but Antichrist. Yes. John says in Revelations, we need to watch out for that Antichrist. But we're going to find out something that we might not have known about that when we get to it. But what I really wanted to do is go into that. Again, I don't know why the order changed, but I'm going to start at the top and move down from that. We're going to look at this mark of Cain. And it's something that has been a lot of debate for quite some time. But I want to ask you, is it a mark, a curse, a both, or opposite? It is the mark, the curse. And as I grew up, that mark was the curse. We may find something different when we go back into the scriptures. This story of Cain getting the mark begins with one emotion, with anger. And believe it or not, not believe it or not, but it is my intent for us to get in more detail on anger in one of the other lessons, but that's not what this is about tonight. There's a lot of misconceptions on anger. But we look in Genesis chapter 4, beginning with the last half of verse 2, it says, Now Abel kept flocks. He was a keeper of sheep, and Cain worked the soil. Now, we know from the beginning of the scriptures that in Genesis that Adam and Eve had children. And the first one was who? Who was the first one? Cain. Yeah, you'd think it'd be Abel. Alphabet A, right? A comes before C. But it was Cain. And who was the second child? Yeah, Abel. So it said, in the course of time, in verse 3, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and I bolded that and underlined it. And his face was downcast. You don't smile when you're angry, do you? Not normally. You frown, you scowl, and all that. And that's what he is doing here. Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So Cain goes to the Lord and offers sacrifice. Now, we don't have anything in the Scriptures to tell us when this sacrifice began, when God told him to start sacrificing to him. But evidently, it was already there because Cain got of his crops and he made a sacrifice to the Lord. Abel, since he was a shepherd or a keeper of sheep, it said he got the fat portions, which this would have been the good stuff. The good stuff. Just the other day, someone said that went to a restaurant that the burger was no good. I was there and the burger was great. The reason they said the burger was no good was because grease was dripping from the burger. Now, I don't know where you came from, but to me, you got to have grease in that burger to have the flavor. There's no such thing as a green burger. You want that fat in there for that flavor. Same way with a steak. If you strip all the fat away, the steak's not going to taste as good. So, Abel is getting the best portions from his flocks, whatever he has slaughtered, to offer up as a burnt offering to God. And in this, we find that God found favor. He liked what Abel did for him, but he did not like what Cain did for him. And we're not really told exactly why, are we? Which makes me think, well, what could it have been? Again, when we go into these mythconceptions, and we're not yet at the mythconception here, but it makes me want to look deeper into things. But, I think it's interesting that the oldest son of a family sometimes has trouble with being accepted the way he wants to be accepted. And I think about the parable that Jesus gave of the prodigal son, right? It was the older brother that when his younger brother came back and said, hey, make me a servant, just put me to work, do whatever, the older son said, he got angry. He got upset. And he said, Father, you should be doing this for me because I've been with you all along. And the father said, don't you understand? Your brother who was lost is now found. But sometimes we see everything revolving around us, and we want to do it our way, do we not? And if we do it our way and it's not the way we're supposed to do it, we get upset, even though we know what the rules are. Now, we don't know what the rules were here, but evidently, Cain and Abel should have known in this case. So I asked myself, why did God accept the sacrifice of Abel and yet reject that of Cain's? Now we know that God said, you do what's right and it'll be okay. But I don't know what right is. The Bible doesn't tell us in this case. And there have been basically 4 different views that people have talked about as to what happened here. The first one I had not thought of. And it kind of slapped me in the face, but as I began looking at it. The first view sees the acceptance of one's offering and the rejection of the other as a sovereign choice of God. God gets to choose what he likes and doesn't like. And I know sometimes, Mama would say, kids, I want you to go do this. And we'd go, why? And you know what she said? Yeah, because I said so. And that's all you need to know. Go do it. And my mother was a gentle soul, but she had all these good biblical mythconceptions to help keep all of us kids in line. But in this case, some commentators argue that the reason for Abel's acceptance and Cain's rejection is based solely upon this sovereign choice of God. There was nothing different about either offering in the sense in that they were offering it up to God, but God rather chose to accept one and reject the other without providing as to any reason why. All we know is he said, if you did what's right, I would have accepted it. So I'm not as much on this view as some might be. So the people in this camp think it's just fruitless. to try to discover the reasons of God's decisions, for they are His and His alone. And I agree with that, but we want to understand, do we not? We want to understand. We're to seek to find the truth, right? To seek that truth so that we can find it. There are others who say, well, the reason is crystal clear. We go forward in time and we see what the Jews were commanded to do, and they were commanded to offer sacrifices. And so this is before the time of the Jewish nation. Just get that in line. But the Jews had to offer these blood sacrifices, and it had to be from clean animals. So a second view believes that the offer was rejected because Cain did not present a blood sacrifice. Now think about it. He could have brought his best crops, the ones without any blemish, the ones that were pure and clean, and he may have scrubbed on them and everything, and they were ones that you truly would love, because in the beginning his parents were told, every seed that has been produced is produced for you to eat. The fruit of the trees are for you to eat, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? From that. So he brought this forward. This could have been a near perfect crop. But if God said blood sacrifice, there's no blood in turnips, no matter how hard you squeeze them, right? And in this case. So that may have been it, is because God cursed him because of that reason. And we'll get into that because it's associated. His punishment is associated. His curse is associated with his crops. But the third view is that poor quality. I talked to you, he could have brought the best. Well, what if he brought, these are the ones that are spoiled, the ones that I will not eat, so let me go sacrifice these to God and I can keep the good stuff for myself. And so he was giving God that which he would not accept himself. That is one view, that the quality of his was poor, while since it said that Abel gave of the fat portions, which was the best part, in this case it's meaning, of that lamb, God accepted his because he was given the best, and rejected Cain's because he was giving them God's scraps. And that could be a sermon, couldn't it? That you could make a sermon. We should tell Michael that, do you give God your scraps? Is that what you wind up giving him? And I might have to say sometimes I've been guilty of that. The fourth view would be, it's just an attitude problem. Just an attitude. We're told that if you come to the altar and you know that you've got something going on with someone else, go and make it right before you come before the Lord. That deals with the heart, the attitude. And maybe Abel was giving out of a true devotion to God, and Cain, his attitude wasn't there. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to give him my good crops that I've worked hard to get? We don't know. But that is a view that some people say, is that he simply approached the Lord in the wrong attitude from that. So now we look at what truly was the curse. And it's not exactly what we thought. The Lord said in Genesis chapter 4, "What have you done?" Now, what's happened here? What has happened at this point? Yeah, he killed a brother over crops. Well, it was more than that. He killed it because his brother looked better than him. Well, it's more than that. He killed his brother because of his anger that he was not acceptable and his brother did a better job. But God is saying, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse. Now here it is. Here it is. And driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Now the Lord is going to turn these things around on Cain. He made his livelihood by being a farmer, as we would call it. And yet, as he spilt his brother's blood on the ground, that blood would taint the ground for him from here on out. And God goes further by saying in verse 12, when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Now, this is the most devastating thing that could happen to a farmer. You can work the ground, you can till it, you can plant the seeds, you can water it, fertilize it, but it will not grow. If that was your livelihood, you'd say it's all over with. And it was a terrible, terrible curse. Not only was he not able to grow anything, but he would become a wanderer. So the curse at this point has nothing to do with the mark. The curse is that the ground would no longer yield crops to him, and he would be a wanderer for the rest of his life. Now, I don't know how much area that he wandered in, but think about it when you said, you don't have a home here anymore. You got to get up and go, and when you get to where you're going to get up and you're going to go again. And when you get there, you're going to get up and go yet again. Now, I'm sure he probably stayed time periods during those, but the curse is you no longer have a home, a permanent home, and you no longer have a way of feeding yourself through the ground. That's pretty harsh for a farmer. I mean, that's in itself almost a death sentence, is it not? So that is the curse. God tells him that he's going to be a wanderer and that the ground will no longer produce for him. Devastating to a farmer. So now we talk about the mark. So what is the mark? I'll tell you what the mark did for him, but I don't know what the mark was, okay? I know what it did for him. I just don't know what it was. And I wish I did. My curiosity gets me. In chapter 4 again, verse 13, Cain says to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a relentless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. He's worried. There's a lot of questions I have here. First of all, who are they that he's worried about, right? He's the firstborn of Adam. Abel's the secondborn. Evidently, there's been some years that have gone down past this. And so he's worried about running into people that will see him, know what he has done, and that they will kill him. So let me get this straight. Other than, was the population large enough at that time for him to worry about it? That he had brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews, and they kept going big. So how many years this was down the road? I'm not quite sure. But he was worried about running into people in his wandering and that they would kill him. So the first thing comes in my mind is that, okay, you could kill your brother because he gave a better sacrifice for you, but you don't want to be killed yourself. And isn't that the way it is? Does not anger cause us to do things that we shouldn't have done and many times regret later? I do not see his repentance here, because remember, when asked where his brother was, he says, am I my brother's keeper? You don't really see any remorse in him. So it's not that. He just seems to be very selfish, thinking only of self. And he says, listen, this is too much for me, God. And if I go out, I will be murdered. And amazingly, God does something for Cain, maybe because he's the first child to ever be born on this planet. Think about it. Adam and Eve were created, right? Created like that. But Cain was the firstborn of mankind. And we know that the first child gets certain privileges over the rest of the children, normally. And perhaps that's why God had compassion on him. And listen, if you've got any thoughts, speak up. You have to speak up loud, and I'll try to reiterate him on this. But these are just the things that goes through my mind. And if you got something, raise your hand, and I'll stop talking from that perspective. But in this case, God says this to him. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So first of all, he's given Cain assurance and hope. Cain's killed his brother, but God says, I'm going to keep people from killing you. And you think, does he deserve it? We talk about things in the beginning with Adam and Eve and the serpent and all that. It's kind of foreshadowing of the new dispensation of Christ coming and all this. Cain did not deserve to be saved. But God said, I'm going to save you. Yes, Jared.
I got a crazy thought. What if Cain wanted to die? Like you're saying, I can't bear this, so if someone finds me, they'll kill me, and that would be great. So God said, no.
Well, what Jared was saying, maybe Cain was saying, hey, he wanted to be killed from that standpoint. He'd rather do that than to walk upon the earth not being able to grow any crops and produce. That's a very good point. I hadn't thought about it. Joe?
Well, you can see where the descendants of Abel might be killing.
Yeah.
It could be their grandfather, great-grandfather that Abel.
Yes, and it become that clan war, Hatfield and McCoy, so to speak, even though they're close. It's just interesting that the second sin recorded in the Scriptures, let me put it that way, second sin recorded in the Scriptures was murder. First one we know is when Adam and Eve disobeyed God in eating of that tree. So, but that's a good point. Yeah, I was going to say blood is thicker than water, but at this time they're all blood related, right, from that perspective. But that's a good point. So he was afraid of Abel's family that would be coming after him. But God had compassion for some reason, and now Jared's got me thinking about that from that. But I'll have to give that some thought on that. No, it's just good. I need to make note of that and give more thought on it. So we don't know, right? We don't know, but he asked for help, and God puts this mark on him. And he says, that mark will tell whoever wants to kill you that if they do kill you, that vengeance will be brought upon them 7 times more. Now, I thought when you died, that was about it. So if they kill Cain, God's going to take them and kill them 7 times over. Does that mean that he's going to go to the family members as well? Again, I don't know. I really don't know. But in this case, it just makes me wonder. There's all these dynamics. But what we see is that God does place a mark that is so visible and so understood that wherever Cain goes, people knows it. Oh, I can't touch him. There's the mark on him. Now, some people have said, well, that's how people got dark-colored skin. Now, think about it. What happened on the flood? We all got wiped out except for Noah's family. So that doesn't make any sense at all. When you look at some historical things, you see that the 3 sons of Noah, that through one of that lineages, you had people that could have come from that area. So that would not be the mark. Some talked about it being some kind of symbol that might have been on his forearm or something that was easy to be seen. I showed that one picture of Cain, where he really didn't have much of a shirt on, more flesh, and it could have been somewhere very visible. I don't know. Maybe it was on his forehead. Instead of the number 666, it had 000. I don't know. I just don't know. But I'm very curious, and the Scriptures does not tell us what that is, except that it was very visible, very noticed, and we don't have the Scriptures recording of anybody killing Cain. Think about it. So it worked. It worked. God said, I won't prevent them from doing it, but if they do it, they'll know that they themselves will be punished, right? It's very interesting from that standpoint. All right. So, the curse and the mark are 2 different things. The curse was that he would take his occupation away, he'd be a wanderer. his salvation was the mark. The mark was his salvation. It said that God is watching over him and that God would make sure that he stays alive. So I just find that interesting in that. So I always thought they were one and the same growing up, but later realized that it wasn't. And we probably won't get through all of this because I talked so long on that other. Okay, we talked about Noah's Ark. From early on, we've always been taught they went into ark 2 by 2, and that is true. They went into ark 2 by 2. But we say 2 of every kind went on to the ark. And that's true, but it's not the full story. Because in Genesis chapter 6, verse 19, verse 16, I don't know why I've got it down. This is 16 through 17. Of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. That's where we get the 2, right? 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you. For what reason? To be kept alive. Because when God saw that the world had become so wicked, he said, I'm going to destroy it, and I'm going to destroy all the animals and creatures on the earth. But he found Noah as a righteous man, the scripture says, without blame. And in this, he would find the salvation. But he didn't want Noah and his family to start without anything. So they were going to put the animals. And contrary to... So let me just ask this. Why did he have a male and a female? Yeah, to procreate, right? Regardless of what is being said by some today, a male cannot have a baby. Oh, yeah. Pretty good, Larry. Oh. It takes a male and a female. That's the way God did it in the beginning, to make procreation, to have other. So Genesis tells us that 2 of every kind will enter the ark, right? And what those 2 were male and female, so 2. And in this, Genesis 6:20 tells us that it was all air and land creatures. So it was those that walked on the earth and those that flew in the air. What was noticeably not there? Fish, right. Fish, whales, and why was that? Yeah, water was their home, all right. It wasn't going to do anything to them. So when God said, I'm going to destroy everything, we got to understand it was everything on the land and that would fly in the air from that standpoint. So that was where the 2 comes by 2. But as we look in Genesis chapter 7, verse 2, God tells him again, take with you 7 pair of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, okay, and 1 pair of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate of unclean, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep various kinds alive throughout the earth. So it wasn't 2 of every kind. It was 2 of every unclean animal, but on clean animals, it was 14. I had to be at least in college or older before I ever heard that. Now, had I read the passage, evidently I didn't pay attention, right? Because it's there, black and white. So, but as this picture shows, you only see 2 of every kind, right? And some of those, the elephants are not clean animals because they don't have a split hoof and all that. But a clean animal had a split hoof and chewed the cud and some things like that, right? Vultures, scavengers were not allowed, right? Were not considered clean. So that meant those of you who love shrimp, that's not clean meat. That's back then, not now, okay? From that, because we know that later on as they get off the ark, God tells them something else and it changes changes everything from that. So again, we ask, why 7 pair? Why not just keep it at 2? Because you can procreate with 2. Have you ever thought about it? What's that? Yeah. What's the first thing Moses did? No, Moses. Yeah. What's the first thing Noah did when he got out of the boat on dry land? Yeah, so all of a sudden you had a species extinct, right? We're not told that babies were born on the boat. We know the sons and daughter-in-laws didn't have babies because it talks about them having children later, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And by the way, did you ever wonder who's the firstborn? The Bible lists them, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Who's the oldest? We say Cain and Abel. Cain's the oldest. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Who? They were triplets. Women do think out of the box better than us guys. I would have never thought about that. Gloria, for those of you online, Gloria said triplets. They could have been triplets. But still, somebody has to come out of the womb first, right? That's a very good point. So, I've already got off. Actually, the oldest was Japheth, who's mentioned last in the Bible. Shem is mentioned first because it was be through his seed that Christ would eventually come. It's just interesting. That's another study altogether, but maybe I'll pique your interest in that. But the sacrifice. So they were in this practice now we see of sacrificing under the days of Noah. And so he made that sacrifice. So they needed to have plenty enough. But also God said so that you could have food. They eat the clean animals at this point in time. And so they had to have enough for food. And again, we're not told that the animals had colts, babies, calves, all that. But we assume they didn't because there had to be limited space upon the boat. But once they got off, all things would be changing. So for sacrifice and for food from that. So even before, again, the Jewish nation was made, there was that thing of clean and unclean. And mostly in here we find that the unclean would have been the scavenger. So you wouldn't eat a vulture from that standpoint because it's a scavenger. But things that ate grass, those would be considered clean. So just throw that out. But so we see that the myth conception of 2 of every kind went in there is only partially right. It was 2 by 2. But for the clean animals, those non-scavengers, there were 14. And there's a lot of questions that I have about that as well in that regards. But then I think, how long did it take to build the ark? Because people say, well, it took about 100 years to 120. Well, and they get that because it says that Noah was 500 years old when he started having children. That's a long time. 500 years. And so they said he was 600 years when he went into the ark. 600 years old. So that's 100 years. But my question would be, the kids are just being born when he was 500. They wouldn't have been much help. And yet, so did they wait until they became men where they could help Noah to build the ship? And then was it like 80, 70 years that it took? We don't know. We're not told. But again, it makes you ask those questions just to see. And I tried to do some additional research on that, but couldn't find a whole lot beyond that. So if anybody has anything to add on that, please just speak up in that. And then there's one other misconception that I want to deal with here. When Noah started building that ark on dry land, this huge boat, and he's dealing with it day after day, and let's say it took 70 years. That what the people did, right? The people came and they ridiculed him and balked him and all this and that and laughed at him, right? But if you go back to the scriptures and read them, it mentions none of that. And I remember in one sermon that I heard, That's what the preacher talked about, was how the people ridiculed him. Now, they may have. I'm not saying they didn't, but I'm saying that in the Scriptures, there is no mention of Noah being ridiculed by the people around him. And I find that interesting in and of itself from that. So, that is dealing with that. And one thing, we're all out of time, but I'll just say this. From this chapter 9 of Genesis, we look down and just quickly says, and let me see where it's at here. Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. We know that they're to multiply now. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth. So now they had dominion over the beasts and all the birds of the sky and every creature that moves along the ground and all the fish. So God's telling him, everything is yours now. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And that was mentioned just this past Sunday during the Lord's Supper, that last statement there, that there's life in the blood from that. But people will use this passage to say that up until this time they ate no meat. Because in the first part of Genesis it talks about, the Lord says, I've given you seeds of the plants to eat, and I've given you fruit of the trees to eat. He did not mention animals. And then you say, well, if that's the case, and I'm not saying that's just when people are reading this, you can do your own study. They say this is God-given permission to man that he can now eat meat. And I'm saying that the evil people beforehand, remember that's why they destroyed the earth, that evil people weren't eating meat already, because as they made those sacrifices, don't you think you smelt that lamb cooking on the fire? And that probably smelt good to them from that respect. But people are saying this shows that at this point in time, now that they can eat meat, and that even though that Abel was a keeper of sheep, he was doing so to have animals for sacrifice and to provide clothing. Now, I don't know what the right answer here is. I think it warrants further study as to whether or not they couldn't eat meat up until this time or not. But we know, at least by this time, that it is. And with that first bell ringing, I'll just say, excuse me. Some people are saying, God is saying, I told you to put everything on that boat because it's for food. And those animals had to be kept alive. But now that they're off the boat, you can now eat them. See? And I really don't know. The good thing is that this has nothing to do with salvation, right? But it makes us think and to look at the whole realm. So that's the gist of it. I was hoping to get through this part. But just one final note. Do you realize when Abraham, once again, people have gotten evil. Abraham's been found as a righteous man, and he's sent out to that, to that land that he doesn't know where. We know it's Canaan. To that land that he doesn't know where he's going. Did you realize that when he was born, Abraham, Noah was alive? And he would go to the age of 57 before Noah would meet his death at 950 years. And I'm thinking, you had all these people that started going wicked again, and yet they had the very man that had witnessed the flood and his sons, and yet they still turned away from God. Now, if Noah were alive today, even though he might be 890 years old, would you not want to go to him and ask him questions? I would feel compelled to do that. But I find it intriguing to realize that Abraham was born when Noah was still alive. All right. Yes.
Don't forget the Tower of Babel, so Abraham couldn't understand Noah.
Very good. Yeah, Tower of Babel, everybody had their own, because of that, everybody had their own language, and so they couldn't understand each other. But it is fascinating, and with Shem, the son of Noah, still being alive, when Abraham is out in the land, Some people, and I don't think it is, but some people will say that Melchizedek, that Jesus was a priest after order of Melchizedek, and that Melchizedek was actually Shem, the son of Noah, because that's through who Jesus came through. I don't necessarily think that, but I just thought I'd throw that out. Any other comments? Thank you so much for your attention. Have a good evening.